Hey guys, welcome to the Productized podcast, produced by Productized, a series of interviews with product innovators, successful makers, and entrepreneurs. We hope those who listen to the ideas on this show are inspired to action. And for show notes and additional resources related to today's podcast, visit productized.medium.com. So today we have a very special episode. This is the sixth episode of season 8 of the Productized podcast. This is a great honor to have Lloyd with us. Hi, Lloyd.
Hey, nice to be here.
Nice meeting you. So let me just do a quick intro here to Lloyd Humphreys. So he grew up in North Wales, but relocated to Copenhagen to get closer to an interesting tech scene. Lloyd is principal product manager for data and analytics at Tradeshift, which is headquartered out of San Francisco. Originally, he was a freelance designer turned product owner, and these days he prefers to work with data because Lloyd believes it's possible to make a bigger impact with that skill set. He approaches his role with lots of care, and at Tradeshift, that's what's actually doing. But he also has a very analytical mindset, and he's using systems thinking to identify the small changes that you can leverage to have this large effect on people, processes, and technology. Tradeshift is the leader in invoicing and accounts payable automation, which uses an AI technology-based technology, which is called actually ADAP. When he's not at work, he can most likely be found at a metal concert or nerding out about submarines, which happens to be one of my favorite topics as well. So let me just tell you a little bit about Tradeshift as well. So Tradeshift is a market leader in invoicing and accounts payable automation and an innovator in the B2B marketplace. They provide access to supplier financing, and by using this cloud-based platform, they help buyers and suppliers digitize invoice processing, automate accounts payable workflows, and let them scale quickly. Tradeshift's vision is to connect every company in the world, creating economic opportunity for all, and that's a great vision. Which leads me to the first question, which is just welcoming you today, Lloyd, and asking you: Are you actually working out of Copenhagen, which is also, if I'm not mistaken, the birthplace of Tradeshift?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm working out of the Tradeshift office here every day in Copenhagen.
Mm-hmm.
We were started here by 3 Danes.
Absolutely. And your background is as a designer. So that's not so common still. Designers becoming product managers, product owners, eventually product managers still have lots of space there to grow. So how do you apply the disciplines you learn as a designer in your current role as a product manager?
I'm sort of surprised that more designers don't want to move over into a product manager role, to be honest. I feel like I get way more ability to impact like a good user experience from this position than I ever did as an individual contributor on the design side of things. I think in terms of applying the disciplines learned, like there's probably something to be taken from the freelance designer side of things. There's a lot of expectation management that you get good at real quick as a freelancer, or you about to sink. You want to deliver things on time, ideally to budget, and then learning to tie deliverables to a certain cost. Like I think that's also a key thing that I learned as a freelancer, that it can be very easy to get into conversations with end users or with customers that you're trying to convince to buy something that oh, well, we would just like this now, please. And it needs to be an extra thing and we're not going to pay for it. So, being able to tie value generation to like the exchange of value between the two companies and between us is kind of something interesting I got out of the freelance side of things. And, doing that well, I guess, is what I got out of the freelance side of things. And then I think being able to shift gears between different fidelities and being able to come to the level of the people that you're trying to talk to in terms of their technical understanding and in terms of what you're trying to get across and what you're trying to convince them to do. So if I'm trying to convince somebody that we should explore something, I can whip together a design document or a wireframe if I'm trying to sell something or get some buy-in for something that we haven't built yet, I can go all the way up to a high fidelity mock-up that looks like the real thing. And I think, being able to switch in between those.
You're still getting your hands dirty and, dirty
Yeah.
in the sense you're developing the mock-ups and giving them to the actual designers in the team to see what's your vision for the product.
Occasionally, yeah. I think there are times where the distance between like my brain and a design is way faster. I can put something together that gets my point across a lot more quickly than if I were to explain it or to try and write a big spec doc or something like that. So I do occasionally still dip back into that and do that as a way to convince people that we should go a certain direction or try and put something in front of a customer and get their feedback, things like that, for sure.
Mm-hmm. And a big part of what you're doing right now involves AI. So where did your interest in AI come from? Is this something that you have always known you wanted, or you have discovered more recently?
To be honest, it's a complete accident. We had an AI team at Tradeshift that were developing like machine learning models, and I've always liked working with data. I think it's very interesting, and some of the smartest people that I know are working in this area. It's like an opportunity to go and be the dumbest guy in the room. So on our machine learning team back when I joined, I think our efforts were like a bit academic. Like we had some stuff in production, but it was very sort of researchy. And I think what I was able to bring to that was like a focus on what we could do that would make a change to the product and bring some of these things to market. So I mean, I feel like I've learned so much. I saw so much opportunity there, and so much, things that we would be capable of delivering value on top of. And I just went for it. So complete accident that I ended up in there, but still doing it, still enjoying it, and still tons of opportunities.
And that was already at Tradeshift.
Yeah.
So how did you end up joining the company?
I ended up moving to Copenhagen to work for Citrix originally. I knew some friends on Twitter that were living here and working for Citrix. So that's how I ended up.
So Citrix had like a development hub in Copenhagen?
They did, yeah.
Okay.
But they ended up closing the offices here. So I took a couple of months figuring out what I wanted to do. And I had also been talking to Christian, who's our CEO, on Twitter for a little while. And, so I'd always kind of known that Tradeshift was a thing and it was in Copenhagen. And, I ended up going for an interview there and thinking that it was going to be an interesting place to join, especially coming from a freelance background. I can really identify with a lot of the problems of, cash flow, getting paid on time, dealing with invoices, actually getting people to pay them. It's really frustrating. So being able to solve that on the scale that we're solving it is really interesting, for sure. Very attractive to me, at least.
Absolutely. So, yeah. So what do you guys, are you working with small business as well? And that's a big part of your target demographic or, segmentation.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Right. That's super powerful. I mean, as any business owner will tell you, that's really the part of the business that most people kind of don't want to go through, right? People are not creating companies to go after invoices and go after clients that are not paying the invoice and so on and so forth. But yeah, the question I'm so you went to Copenhagen 7 years ago, right? What drew you to? Was it the startup scene? What was the what drew you to Copenhagen first?
It's kind of a funny story, because I was looking to leave North Wales to just go and live in a city somewhere in Europe, and I really had it in my head that I was going to move somewhere warm and cheap. And then I got talking to my friends on Twitter, and I ended up somewhere very expensive and kind of always cold. So these days, I mean, I stick around because I think it's a beautiful city. There is a really vibrant startup scene. Tons of meetups. You can go out and meet anybody who knows about anything. And it's just a very sort of livable attitude towards building businesses and building software. I don't think anybody's completely breaking their back to do it. It's not this sort of crazy hustle attitudes towards it. It's a very nice work-life balance. The people put their lives first in terms of building businesses and building software and working together. It's a really, really nice environment to work in.
Is that the part that you enjoy the most in your current work setup? Is it the life balance?
I think the thing I enjoy the most about my job is the diversity of what I get to do. I feel on the data side of things, at least, I get to impact, or I get to help people impact at least how they run the business, understanding the product so that we can develop new things, identifying problem areas, opportunities, all the way through to helping customers understand how they are using the product. What are they spending their money on? Passing their audits, things that people, do not enjoy doing, but we try and make it easier. I feel like I'm learning all the time. It's like sort of infinite depth to how complicated something like Tradeshift can be. You work closely with so many large enterprises that have very unique ways of working. One of the one of the reasons that we're both nerds about submarines is they're just very complex pieces of machinery. There's a lot to be learned there. I just kind of like understanding how things work and understanding how people work together, and getting into these organizations and understanding how some of these fundamental processes, like how do you pay for stuff, like understanding things like that, is very interesting to me. I don't know. I like to build things, and I think there are kind of limitless opportunities at Tradeshift to contribute to any bit of the build process that I'm interested in. If I want to do a bit of design, I can do a bit of design. If I want to write a bit of code, I can write a bit of code.
It's the freedom.
Yeah, absolutely.
And what's your current biggest challenge? What are you really challenged
Great
about?
question.
Yeah.
I would say like a data governance problem. I think,
okay.
I mean, as any data product person is going to tell you that this is a problem. I wouldn't say it's critical.
So for people that are not so familiar with the concept, data governance is what exactly?
So our team aggregates a lot of data from across the organization, and we're not in control of generating it. We're not in control of validating it. But we are processing it and spitting it out into different areas of our systems. So we send it over into a machine learning algorithm, or we'll send it back to a customer, things like that. And understanding what's happening at the source and how that is being passed through all of the different steps of a data pipeline, so that we can make sure that we're compliant, make sure that we're not making any mistakes, and make sure that we understand what's going on. Like you could imagine that 11 years of Tradeshift, there's a lot of this stuff going on, and making sure that everybody understands all of these processes, all of these transformations, where data comes from and how we came to a certain outcome. I mean, documentation is sort of where people traditionally lean for something like that. But then you make a change, the documentation doesn't get updated. then it becomes a liability to have documentation around. So you really want to be building tooling, things that are self-documenting, infrastructure as code. You want it to be as thin a layer as possible. So dealing with that is probably our biggest challenge, but it's a really difficult one to get right. And I think that's probably at the end of the day something that becomes a competitive advantage for us. Like we make a product available to our customers, which is basically their data cleaned up and they can have it back. So, I mean, things like that, we invest in it to make our lives easy and understand what's going on in our own systems and build reporting on top of it, build data products for customers. But at the end of the day, there's a lot of value just in the cleanup and the documentation and making it easy to work with that we can provide back to customers too. And I think that's quite often overlooked.
Yeah, well, one of the questions we have here from the audience is, with your recent experience with AI, how do you think that this will fundamentally change the future of product management in features in general? And does it have a direct impact in your practice already?
I don't think it has a direct impact in my practice right now. I think there are some really cool startups. The engineering manager I used to work with is currently working at a startup called Forecast. They're basically trying to do product management, or maybe project management, with a real focus on implementing a machine learning model or an AI behind making sure that products are delivered on time. And I think that's a really interesting thing that they're going for there. I would love to try something like that in delivering some of the products that I deliver. I think they're maybe more focused towards projects like delivering a building or something like that. But I could definitely see things like that becoming useful. I would also
Yeah.
say proactively, getting into analytics, audit trail data, process mining kind of things. If something could tell me 20% more of your users are doing this year over year, and it's not really something that you ever hooked up telemetry to, we just kind of figured it out based on click streams or usage patterns or something like that. It can often be, the answer can be right in front of you, and it can be kind of difficult to identify it. Something that can identify those patterns without me having to think that a pattern might exist. I think there's a lot of opportunity in things like that.
Absolutely. It's quite interesting you spoke about project management in this context, because actually submarines, right? They led to the development of the Gantt charts, and Gantt charts being used by project managers all over the world to plan their whatever they're doing. And actually, the first nuclear submarine was what led the U.S. Navy to develop Gantt charts. And yes, I was Patrick Collision from Stripe.
Yeah.
So he has this blog site where or kind of blog or site, as his own personal site. I think it's patrickcollision.com/fast, where he's going through lots of details of projects that used to be developed faster in the past and they're being developed right now. So before this conversation, we were actually speaking about the USS Virginia, which is still the current US, I think the state of the art in terms of submarines for the US Navy right now. And it took, I don't know, more than a decade to develop the submarine. But the first nuclear submarine was built in less than 6 months. Crazy stuff, right? And
absolutely.
If you think about if you think about it, it's really mind-blowing. So
necessity being the mother of invention, I guess.
Absolutely.
Just get it done.
Yeah, I think maybe necessities definitely plays like 90%. I guess, yeah, necessity is probably one of the most important things. I think there's also, I don't know, it's actually a great question. I think they actually wrote an entire article about it with an economics professor, and they don't have like very good conclusions to what is leading projects to not be executed as efficiently as in the 50s or 60s. There's lots of theories about yes, necessity, but also red tape and so on. So coming back to product management and running away from project, which is what all product managers do. Are you self-taught? Have you studied or taken any courses on product management? I mean, or do you have any kind of in-house, say in trade shift that led you to become the product person you are today?
I've never had any formal education in design or in product management. So just sort of learned on the internet, YouTube tutorials, just trying stuff out. Definitely one of those people that likes to just try things rather than read a book about them or something. But yeah, quite often I'm reading. I think who made me the product manager I am today, I would have to say there are a number of people at Tradeshift who have been like very influential on that. My first manager was a guy called Pete, and I mean, he was really helpful in terms of helping me see the big picture, calm down, not freak out about every urgent thing that comes in being a super urgent thing, taking the wind out of the sails of some of those things. Really appreciate that. And then a guy called Klaus, he always banging on about integrity, delivering what you say you're going to do, sticking to your deadlines, trying to make sure that people understand what's going on. I think integrity is like a really interesting word when you talk about product management. So those two guys that I've worked closely with have definitely had an influence on me.
They're both Danish.
Pete is British and Klaus is Danish. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. What about? Yeah, go on.
And then Twitter, reading. I think John Cutler is a sort of, I'm sure that I'm not the first person to say that. Huge influence on me. Read everything he puts out there. Really interesting guy. And then some of the books, I don't think I really read a lot of books on product management specifically, but maybe things like positioning, how to sell things, how to pitch things, maybe like a more of a business positioning kind of books. I think all of the things around product management, managing people, how to get people to rally behind a goal, things like that. So I think I don't actually think I've done a whole lot of reading around product management. I'm a wing it, try it out, iterate in my own learning kind of guy. And whenever I feel a gap, try and find a book or an article, or I'm sure there's something in John Cutler's back catalog that I'd find interesting. So trying to approach it like that.
So we're heading towards the second part of this conversation. So let me just do a quick pause here to remind people that if you want to hear some interesting topics next year, we are preparing for you an excellent list of courses and workshops. And this is something that we really recommend you to be part of. So please fill in the form that we're going to share on the chat on YouTube to help us choose the most interesting topics for 2022 in the product area. This same link is also going to be shared on the podcast description. And this will be super important because it's really you, the product manager, hearing this, that is going to tell us what you want to hear, what are you struggling with, and what are the topics and the people that you want to hear in 2022. So going back to our conversation, and also to your career a little bit more, you were talking about working in Denmark and some of this core concepts of integrity and being, talking the walk and walking the talk and delivering according to your own promises. What do you say, it's the biggest difference in terms of the work ethics of working in Denmark that you have seen from, your experience this last 7 years of working in the country?
I think the Danish working culture is extremely straight. People will not mince their words. They'll just be really upfront with you. It's like, if you've read the book Radical Candor, it's like living in a country where everybody read that book. So I really appreciate that. I think people are really on the money a lot of the time, and they're not afraid of giving their feedback. But people are also very, very willing to receive feedback. I don't think anybody really sees it as ever takes it as an offense. I mean, people take these things very constructively. I may have been lucky in the companies that I've worked in here, but that seems to be my perception, at least. And I also think as a society, I see people who care about their neighbors, if that makes sense. I think I don't think that I could have a happy life if I was surrounded by people who are unhappy. And I think that's a sort of common, maybe a common thinking process here. So I think taking care of each other.
Taking care of each other. Yeah, they even have like this specific word for, happiness in the community, which became a marketing segue for companies like Carlsberg and others. What's that word?
Maybe hygge.
Hygge, right?
Yeah.
Is that the meaning of hygge? Is like caring for others?
It's like it's if you're having a cozy time, surrounded by friends. So
cozy time surrounded by friends. Okay, let's take it from there. And that is also part of the office culture, I guess.
Absolutely. People like to hang out. You'll never struggle to find somebody who wants to have a beer with you after work. That's for sure.
Okay. That's
really nice.
That's making Copenhagen a very attractive destination for lots of people right now, especially in this crazy remote only or COVID times where we're spending so much time with ourselves at home. So how would you describe the Tradeshift's AI core offering, and how much is it leveraging the products right now?
I think a bit tongue in cheek, but probably like incomplete. I feel like we've seized so many opportunities and tried so many things, and it only just makes me think bigger and bigger and bigger and more of what we could do. So I look at what we've got and I just see gaps, and I just see so much more that we could do.
Yeah, whoever is inside the ship, right, is always
Yeah,
seeing the whole all the troubles. But there is this core technology, which is that yada technology, right, which is part of the the marketing proposition, value proposition of the product. So what does it actually give to the user, and how do you see the vision for this kind of core AI technology for the roadmap into the next 5 years? And you don't have to publish the roadmap of Tradeshift here, but just to understand the importance of AI and how this is actually fundamentally changing the product. And since we had a couple of questions in that regards as well, I think that would be
for sure.
interesting.
I think we've positioned Ada as this sort of platform level artificial intelligence offering that we have on our platform. So we always talk about Tradeshift as a platform for supply chains. You can be a seller, you can be a buyer. You could also come to Tradeshift and you could be a bank or a financer, an insurance company, a marketplace, all kinds of things, an independent software vendor. So we've tried to build this as something that is a platform that we're building on top of, but a platform that anyone could build on top of. So when you think about the different levels where we could deploy machine learning models at Tradeshift, we could deploy them network wide to every company on the network, and all of the activity on the network is feeding into that. So this would be something like if I send you a purchase order and you send me back an invoice, very often due to the way that the systems are integrated with each other, you might not be doing that directly on Tradeshift, but it eventually hits Tradeshift.
Right.
And the references between the lines on those documents might be broken. And all of the effort that we put in up front to make sure that the purchase order is correct sort of goes out of the window. And now we have a manual invoice to process. So something that we've been working on the network level is sort of relinking those together after the fact using a machine learning model that we call line linker. So that's something that we deploy everywhere. Then we'll take a step closer. So a smaller scope, we'll have company level models that we try and deploy. These are things like coding categorization. So coding is basically if you've ever filled out an expense report, you have to put in a cost center or a GL code, project code, things like that. Some of these companies have insane setups for these, 10, 15 different codes for the different kinds of products that they're trying to buy. And we try and automate that with a machine learning model. Now, we can't deploy that to everyone because it's unique per company,
right?
But we can deploy active learning machine learning models where as soon as that invoice gets approved, that's a new piece of training data for the model.
Right. Does that work on top of, let's say, legacy SAP systems, or does that take SAP out of the equation altogether?
So quite often we will sit in between SAP and a customer's supply base or supply chain. So you could think of Tradeshift as an aggregator that makes it easy for sellers and vendors to send their documents to us, because maybe we're a bit easier to work with. And we package all of those and send them through in the end back to SAP, if that is the system that the customer is using. So
you're not killing SAP. That's a shame.
Not today, that's for sure.
All right. Well, it should. I would totally buy that vision. We are the SAP killers, and the world does need that. But yeah, yeah. So what's so? Sorry, I think I still interrupted you on your flow there. Yeah, all good. So what's important here in your product development process? You have this design side, technical side, and are you still struggling with your X designer on that? Are you?
No, absolutely not.
Happy?
I think it helps, if anything. I think if we take the coding functionality that we developed, for example, we spent some time developing that as an MVP, and we had a model that would sit in production and it would suggest codes for things. And we took it to a whole bunch of customers. And what we had in our mind was like, you turn this on, forget about it. It just starts coding things. It's going to be awesome. And we couldn't convince anybody to turn it on. And I think coming back to, a bit of soul searching there, I think like people buy a system like Tradeshift because they want control over this process. And introducing machine learning into that process sort of introduces a bit of a chaos element. at least if a human gets something wrong, then they have somebody to be mad at. They have somebody that they can go and teach. But with the machine learning methodology, it becomes a little more difficult for them to do that, and they weren't willing to give up that control. Oh, I've lost my host here, but I'll keep talking because I'm sure we're still streaming. They feel like they're giving up control. And on the design side of things, what we ended up doing there is we built a dashboard that would basically show you, okay, here are the probabilities that we see, and based on the last 90 days of data that you have processed, here's what we think the next 90 days is going to look like. And if you can give us cost ideals for these things, so you know how much it costs you to manually process an invoice like this, you know how much it's going to cost you to have to fix one, the rework involved in something like that, then we can show you where is the perfect setting for you to say, this is the trade-off that I'm willing to make. I'm willing to correct this many invoices because it means that I'm gonna get a substantial benefit on the rest. And being able to package that up in a dashboard, in a design that sort of puts this in front of the customer and helps them understand what's going on there, is huge. And we love the idea of the simplicity of just a button that you push and it's enabled, and isn't it magic? But everybody has different data that they're putting through a system like this, and everybody has different outcomes and goals that they're going for with a system like this. And being able to sort of do that research, think about it, from a design perspective, how do you want to communicate this back to the customer? Hey Andre, I'm still talking. Being able to communicate this back to the customer is great.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Did you hear me?
Yeah, I did.
Great.
Part of it, I think I might have lost you for a couple of seconds, but otherwise, yeah, I think I was able to understand most of the answer to the question. Yeah. So, yeah, maybe just taking it on a different direction, or maybe not so much, but out of pure curiosity, I've heard that you are icon collection enthusiast. So how is that?
That was a little while ago for sure. I think that was just about when I moved here. I was building this big icon set, and back then they didn't really exist in a way that was very consistent. I found myself designing these things over and over again for my own projects. So I think that was the first money I made online, just selling those back when I lived in Wales, actually. But these days not so much. I think they're still available on Icon Finder, but other than that, I don't really sell them anymore. But it was a super interesting experience. And when you do something like that over and over and over again, you really start to notice the little things that really wind you up when you when you see these icons all over the web. It's almost a curse, because now you start to notice all the little things that you wouldn't have done it like that.
Yeah. And speaking about curses, any ideas of going to the NFT bandwagon?
Oh, I don't know about that. I'm not one to discount any technology. I think it's it's interesting, and I'm following it for sure, but definitely feels a little pyramid schemey at the moment. It seems like a little opportunistic. I haven't seen that killer use case for it yet. But I'm open to it. I think it's an interesting technology, and I wouldn't want to discount it yet. Could one day be a tool in the box, right?
Yeah. So one of the most important jobs of the product manager is really understanding the user's problem and fulfilling their expectations about the product. So how much of UX design is an empathic and psychological approach to the problem, as you see it?
Great question. Difficult question. I think during the research and the testing phases, it's definitely more like you almost feel like you're a therapist for the user. You're trying to ask not leading questions. You're trying to get them to talk as much as possible. I think it's good to be able to acknowledge when you're incapable of empathizing with this kind of user as well. Like some of the people that we work with are doing jobs that I didn't really know existed before I joined Tradeshift, and are doing them, so effectively, or almost, only using the keyboard. They're barely looking. They're racing through it. It's amazing, and it's very difficult for me to empathize with something like that and understand what they're doing there. So, being clear that sometimes you're not the end user, and I've seen us fall into this trap a few times where we'll design something, or at least I'll see a design for something it's more consumer, and I think that's great. It's good to be accessible, but that can also shut out a whole group of people, and a lot of those end up being our target audience in an enterprise product environment, at least. So acknowledging that sometimes you are not the end user for something like this, you really need to listen, and especially some of the AI stuff that we're trying to get out there. There's this overlap between what I think the market wants and what the market thinks that it needs, and being able to position those things quite often to the person who is going to pay for the product, but never going to touch it. So there's an interesting trade-off to be made there too. Like, you want a demo and an interface and a product that you can click with in 2 minutes as somebody who does not use the product, but something that at the end of the day is not clunky, doesn't get in the way, and doesn't and makes the life easier of the person who is going to use it. So there's this very interesting trade-off that we're often making, and I think people are also sometimes a little afraid to talk about that. It almost sounds like there's an impurity in your design process, that you're designing for someone who's never going to use the product. But sometimes that's necessary, and sometimes that's an important part of getting something over the line and getting it adopted. I'd rather do that and actually have people using it than do that and nobody ever wants to touch it because we never sell it.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking about sales, Tradeshift recently passed the $1 trillion in transactions processed through the platform. So what is the North Star metric for Tradeshift?
I would definitely say it's the transaction volume on the platform. So we see it as a side effect of the flywheel working, I guess. So we want to have more sellers on Tradeshift, simpler onboarding. We want to get them there through simpler onboarding, and the more sellers there are, the more compelling it is for an enterprise-sized buyer, because their sellers are already on Tradeshift. If you're an enterprise-sized customer using something like Tradeshift, it is a huge pain to move from one system to another, and you don't want to do it. And we can make that pain a lot simpler, because in many industries and many verticals, you're joining Tradeshift as an enterprise buyer, and your sellers are already selling stuff to other buyers that are already on the network. They're already there. So we see this as a flywheel. There's more sellers, more buyers, makes it more compelling to join as a seller, makes it easier for us to convince buyers that this is the place that they need to be. So yeah, I mean, that North Star metric is definitely a side effect of us knowing that is working.
And related to metrics, or not necessarily, what do you think are the most common mistakes PMs do? And this is also a question from the audience. And how about your personal experience about this? Common mistakes that you see on the practice, either in your team or just as you see it, and how do you take stock from those mistakes?
I think a common mistake that I see is people have an answer in mind, and it's pretty easy to make the data dance and get it to tell you whatever you want. If you torture it enough, it'll tell you anything. I think it is good. A good way to mitigate that is going into it is to talk to somebody else and describe the kind of data points that you're looking for and how they're going to support your decision-making process before you ever touch the data. Because I think as soon as you're into something like Mixpanel, or you're looking at a dashboard of your product metrics, it's really easy to just start and click and click and click. And all
it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy of
exactly
data supporting your claims.
It really helps to think about this up front. For sure.
Right. And still on the data, you believe that AI is one of those tools that we have on the toolbox, but not only the tool, but a critical one. So could you explain what other key tools you think are crucial as well, other than AI? And
I think it's difficult to touch on specific tools. I often say this because when I meet with people, they will say to me that I'm like an AI product manager. And I wouldn't necessarily say that I'm an AI product manager. It's just like, I'm a product manager. I have problems that I'm interested in solving. And AI is a tool that we can choose to use to solve them. And pretty often people will come with ideas and they think machine learning is going to be amazing at solving this, and they are right that a computer is going to be amazing at solving this. But machine learning, if anything, introduces uncertainty, it introduces complexity. You might have to go back and fix things. It's never perfect. So it's a tool. You need to know when it's appropriate to reach for it. And I really wouldn't write off any technologies. We just talked about NFTs, for example. I don't personally see it being like amazing right now, but I'm not writing it off. It's a tool in the toolbox. It's probably not one that I would use very often. We were discussing an idea for sending people physical mail the other day. I don't think we're going to do that, but it's a tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, it's one of the tools, definitely.
You should know how to use your tools. You should know their limitations. You should know how they're going to hurt you if you use them wrong. Pick the right tool for the job. And sometimes machine learning is the right tool for the job.
Right, and we can also meet you at metal concerts. So
definitely.
Which kind do you like? What kind of what's the favorite band? Which concert have you been to lately?
Oh, I haven't been to much lately. I'm really looking forward to seeing Pop. They have this amazing festival here in Copenhagen called Copenhagen. Which is basically 3 days in the summer. It's all heavy metal. I can't wait for that. So it was delayed last year. We're going to go this year. Really excited for that. So two of my favorite bands are going to be there. So Pop, Knocked Loose. I think if you're familiar with either of those, you're like, those are on completely different ends of the spectrum. But really
not so familiar. But I was with John Romero, the creator of Doom. And yeah, he came here to Portugal to one of these events when we started having in-person events, and that was quite recently. In last October, and he was telling how metal music was so important in the development of the entire narrative of the game, and the whole inspiration of the game was really metal. And because John Romero, being such a heavy metal fan, ended up importing so many of those concepts into the game universe. So you didn't know that? Yeah. Yeah, I didn't know that neither. I mean, you could kind of figure it out, I guess, but I just realized that on his keynote. So yeah, last note, still the submarines, right? Because that's something we should be talking a little.
Oh, you muted.
I am.
Oh, sorry.
So the whole submarine thing is something that I'm also very fond. So, but where, why do you have this interest? Is it because what?
It's I'm kind of interested in how everything works. I mean, I'm one of those kids that takes things apart for sure. I think it's extreme engineering. There are interesting trade-offs that they had to make in order to accomplish some of these things. And I guess, there's some aspect of like, they're so advanced, they're so secret, and that there are these extreme feats of engineering that you know about. So what don't you know about? There's got to be something very mysterious about them. So I'm a huge fan. I really enjoyed Smarter Every Day. It's that YouTube channel. He had a 6 or 7 part series where he goes on board the USS Toledo, I think.
Smarter Every Day.
Under the ice.
I'm also following him on YouTube.
Very cool. The whole how the salinity in the water affects the buoyancy of the boat. How the temperature of the water. Things like this are just so interesting. How it all meshes together. It's never one thing, right? It's like it's a balance. It's a dance.
It's a
Cool.
dance. It's just like product management, right? It's
Exactly.
a big dance, and
Yes.
that's also part of the fun. All right. So thank you, Lloyd. It was great having having this conversation with you. And yes, thank you for joining the Productized podcast. If you enjoyed your stay, give us your review on Apple Podcast and share this whole episode with friends and colleagues. You also have the show notes and more episodes at productized.medium.com. And let me just tell you that next week we will have a special podcast. It's going to be the first in real life podcast in the three-year long history of Productized podcast. So our guest is going to be Tiago Cunha Reis. She's the founder and CEO of Meta Dynamics. Tiago's expertise relies on microelectronics and data science, and he also has a specialization in natural user interface. So if you're curious to know more about it, join us and join our community. We'll share all these links on the chat and the podcast description. Thank you so much for being with us.